Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we are going to another educational video. This time it's going to be on coral and coral reefs, and the scientific classification for coral is the domain is Eukaryota, the kingdom Animalia, phylum Cnidaria, subphylum Anthozoa, and then class Octocoralliae or Hexacoralliae. And then there are multiple different orders of corals and whatnot, but that is the main scientific classification for them. And then I have just a picture here of like wonderful, colorful corals. So, what exactly is a coral? I'm sure most people have seen pictures or possibly gone to the ocean and seen corals, but what exactly are they? A coral group is a colony of genetically identical polyps. And if you see here in the picture that I have here, each one of these is a small polyp. So whenever you see a big piece of coral, it is a combination of all of these smaller polyps and organisms. And it's a colonial marine invertebrate. They're invertebrates, they don't have a backbone. And they form compact colonies of many identical individual polyps. And then they secrete a calcium carbonate to form a hard skeleton. So whenever you look at coral or whatever, or I guess you look at a dead coral, they leave behind this calcium carbonate skeleton. That is what the corals make to build on and grow on. Then we have the anatomy of a coral, or a coral polyp. Coral polyps are tiny soft-bodied animals that resemble miniature sea anemones, and they are fundamental building blocks to all corals. So I have a picture of here, one of these here. You can see they have tentacles, nematocytes, stomachs, all the things that a living organism needs, just right over here. Typically, they're only a few millimeters in diameter and a few centimeters in height. And their sac-like body has a central mouth surrounded by a ring of tentacles. So as you look there, like at the tentacles, at the very center of it, that little like darker black spot there, that is where the mouth where they feed. The food goes down into their stomach. And tentacles can contain thousands of stinging organelles called nematocytes. Those are the stinging cells. The calicle, a hard protective limestone skeleton, is at the base of the polyp, which kind of connects them to each other, the skeleton. These are colonies, so a polyp can live individually or in a large colony that forms into a coral reef. They attach to the seafloor or really anything hard that they can attach to, and buds into thousands of clones, which over time join with other colonies to create reefs. Individual colonies grow by asexual reproduction of polyps. So, I guess what's the asexual reproduction? So like that. So reproduction, individual colonies grow by asexual reproduction of polyps. So if you look at the picture here behind me, you can see number one is asexual reproduction, the formation of coral polyps on the same coral body. So they'll it looks like basically dividing, and then later on there can be fragmentation where one of these polyps, these asexual polyps, can break off, and then they can grow their own new coral colony. Then there's also sexual reproduction, a mixture of gametes to form a planula, which then grow into new coral colonies. So there's asexual reproduction, which can lead to fragmentation. Then there's also sexual reproduction, which is sperm and egg. So fertilized eggs form the planulae, which is a mobile early form of a coral polyp, which when mature settles to form a new colony. These planulae there are basically medusa forms. They're free swimming and stuff like that. Fragmentation, like I said there, it's whenever a broken coral fragment forms a new colony. And then I have a picture there of planulae here. That is the free swimming medusa kind of form of it to my left there. And they are very small. So, feeding. Some corals are able to catch plankton and small fish using their stinging cells on their tentacles, but most coral obtain a majority of their energy and nutrients from the photosynthetic unicellular dinoflagellates that live within their tissues, and it's a symbiotic relationship. And then I have pictures here of like the plankton and small fish that they might try to eat and whatnot. And they're about 1 millimeter. Yeah, so very small, very small. And there's tons of different types. There's not just like one type of plankton. So this algae that grow on the corals is Symbiodinium, and it's a genus of dinoflagellates that encompasses the largest and most prevalent group of endosymbiotic dinoflagellates. It is a unicellular microalgae and commonly reside in the endoderm of tropical cnidarians such as coral, sea anemones, and jellyfish. So they're not just on corals, they can be on a few different other types of creatures. Also harbored by various species of flatworms and mollusks and demosponges. And then I do have a picture here behind me of what it would look like of these dinoflagellates growing on the coral. And you can see like all these little holes that are in the coral, they just kind of just live in the gaps. So pretty cool. They enter the cell through phagocytosis and persist as intracellular symbionts, reproduce, and disperse to the environment. The symbiont and host cell exchange organic and inorganic molecules so that it enables the growth and proliferation of both partners. So the algae get a nice safe place to live and then also get some food and stuff from the coral, whereas the coral gets energy from the algae by the algae just doing photosynthesis and stuff like that, and they both are able to grow and live. Corals actually get up to 90% of their nutrients from these symbionts. So, what are some types of coral? So, one of my favorites is the brain coral. Brain coral looks pretty cool. As you can see, it looks kind of like a brain. This one is yellow, but they don't actually have to be particularly yellow. But due to their generally spheroid shape and groove surface, this resembles a brain, like I said. They are found in shallow, warm water coral reefs in all the world's oceans. The lifespan of the largest brain corals is around 900 years old, so they can live a very, very long time. Colonies can grow as large as 1.8 meters or 6 foot or more in height. Brain corals extend their tentacles to catch food only at night, but also receive nutrients provided by the algae which live within their tissues. These brain coral are important coral reef builders because they are stony corals. So they are a nice building block for other corals to build onto. Then we also have the staghorn coral. It looks like horns, as you can see here. I have two different pictures of them that are slightly different. They're characterized by thick, upright branches, which can grow in excess of 2 meters or 6.5 feet in height and resemble the antlers of a stag. They can exhibit very fast growth, adding up to 5 centimeters or 2 inches in new skeleton for every 1 centimeter of skeleton each year. They are one of the fastest growing fringe coral species in the Western Atlantic, and they serve as one of the most important reef building corals because they are the fastest growing. And they are just a very, very pretty coral. Like, other than the brain coral, which just looks super interesting, this one is just so, they just grow so big. They can get so big. I've seen pictures of, like, before a lot of the coral reef bleaching and stuff over in the Western Atlantic, where you just look down and it is just full, a forest of these staghorn corals. It would be wonderful to see. Then we also have pillar coral, which, as you can see in the pictures beside me, they look like pillars or also resemble fingers or clusters of cigars. They grow up from the seafloor and can grow on both flat and sloping surfaces at depths down to 20 meters or 65 feet. One of the few coral types of hard coral in which the polyps can commonly be seen feeding during the day. So most corals do not feed during the day, they feed at night, but this is one of the few that has been seen feeding during the day. They are very slow growing and long-lived species. And if the whole colony is dislodged or topples over, then a new cylindrical pillar can grow vertically from the fallen coral. So even if these corals do break and fall, that is not the end for them. They can still grow up from the old pillars. So they are very, I guess that's the reason why they're so long-lived, because they can survive so many different things. So, one of the big things that is happening with corals right now in the world is coral bleaching. So, the bleaching is just a disassociation of the coral and the symbiont, or loss of the chlorophyll within the alga, resulting in the loss of an animal's pigmentation. So, basically what that means is the dinoflagellates, or the algae that live on the coral, they will lose their chlorophyll, losing their color, which then makes it so they cannot produce food. And then the algae will die, and then because coral get like 90% of their energy from the algae, then the coral will end up dying. So, this is kind of what I'm talking about by staghorn coral. If you look at the picture behind me, this is a whole, I guess, forest of staghorn coral. And this is what I meant by they're like everywhere you look. There's so much of it. They're very fast growing. But all of these are white, and that is because of the bleaching. This is caused by high seawater temperatures or climate change. Also, it can be because of like ocean acidity and salinity and other stuff like that. Also, exposure to high iridescence levels, extreme low temperatures, and low salinity. The bleach state is associated with decreased host calcification, increased disease susceptibility, and partial or total mortality. So basically, corals die. That's basically what happens when they get bleached. They just die. So, coral reefs. They are an underwater ecosystem characterized by reef-building corals, mostly stony corals. Most reefs grow best in warm, shallow, clear, sunny, and agitated water. So, the shorelines, basically. Most coral reefs are built from stony corals whose polyps cluster in groups. And you can see behind me here all the stony corals that are growing in groups, making like a big old rock or boulder or stony support. Coral reefs first appeared 485 million years ago, displacing the microbial and sponge reefs of the Cambrian. So during the Cambrian period, instead of corals, there were sponge reefs because sponges grew so well during the Cambrian period. Shallow coral reefs form some of the Earth's most diverse ecosystems, and they occupy less than 0.1% of the world's ocean area, which is about half the size of France, yet they provide home to at least 25% of all marine species. So they are very, very important for the world's oceans. So there are different types of reefs. So one of these is the fringe reef. A fringe reef, also called a shore reef, is directly attached to a shore or borders it, and it follows the coastline and can extend for many kilometers. So if you look at the picture here, it basically is an extension of the shore. So it'll grow just a little bit underneath the water surface, so there's still water covering it. It'll just keep growing out from the shoreline. And then I have a picture here of an actual fringe reef that's very similar. So, it's the most common reef type, and usually less than 100 meters wide, but some are hundreds of meters wide. Initially formed on the shore at a low water level and expand seaward as they grow in size. So they'll start growing very, very close to the shore, and then they'll start growing very, very far out. Then we have barrier reefs. Okay, I think this is one that people have heard of because of a certain barrier reef that is very important that we'll talk about. Barrier reefs are separated from the mainland or island shore by a deep channel or lagoon. So instead of like the fringe reef growing out from the shore, this one will grow a ways out from the shore and grow up. Their lagoons can be several kilometers wide and 30 to 70 meters deep. Formation takes considerably longer than a fringe reef, thus barrier reefs are much rarer. They are thought to have formed either as the seabed lowered or sea level rose. And then again, we have the picture here showing it growing up from the seafloor. So, one of the most well-known barrier reefs is the Great Barrier Reef, which is the largest known coral reef system and composed of over 2,900 individual reefs and 900 islands stretching for over 2,300 kilometers or 1,400 miles over an area approximately 344,400 square kilometers or 133,000 square miles. It's located in the Coral Sea off the coast of Queensland, Australia, separated from the coast by a channel of 160 kilometers or 100 miles wide, in places over 61 meters or 200 feet deep. That is a mouthful. It can even be seen from outer space and is the world's biggest single structure made of living organisms. So, the Great Barrier Reef was selected as a World Heritage Site in 1981 and is labeled as one of the 7 natural wonders of the world in 1997. It is a large part of the reef is protected by the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park, which helps to limit the impact of human uses and try to protect it. The reef has also lost more than half of its coral since 1985 because of all the different things I've talked about already. Then we have a picture here of showing where it's located on the map, and then a picture of the Great Barrier Reef from the air, from above. So that was the fringe reef, the barrier reef. Then we have a platform reef. So a platform reef is kind of similar to a barrier reef, but it's also called a bank or table reef. So it can form on the continental shelf as well as in the open ocean, and in fact anywhere where the seabed rises close enough to the surface of the ocean to enable the growth of a reef-forming corals. Unlike fringing and barrier reefs, which extend only seaward, platform reefs grow in all directions, and they can grow in variable size, ranging from a few hundred meters to many kilometers across. Platform reefs are typically situated within an atoll where they adopt the name patch reefs, and we'll talk about atolls very soon. And then up above me here, I have a picture of a platform reef. So it just grows up from the continental shelf in all directions. So what is an atoll? So an atoll is something that I've heard about like pretty often. Like I've read books and stuff talking about an atoll, but I'd never actually seen one or looked up one before. An atoll or an atoll reef is a more or less circular or continuous barrier reef that extends all the way around a lagoon without a central island. So, yeah, it is just a reef, a barrier reef with a hole in it that's full of water. That's basically what it is. It usually forms from fringing reefs around a volcanic island, and then over time the island erodes away, sinking below the sea level. And many also are formed by the sinking of a seabed or rising of sea level. Coral reef zones. So there's different zones of coral reefs. So we have a picture here above me showing all the different areas as we're talking about them so you can visualize them a little bit better. But the reef flat, which is the zone between the island and the reef crest, it's a sheltered side of the reef. In this zone, the ocean bottom is formed by coral rock and loose sand. Large parts of this zone may be exposed during low tides. Then we have the reef crest, which is kind of like the barrier reef kind of. The reef crest is the highest point of the reef and is almost always exposed at low tide. It is exposed to the full fury of incoming waves, and living coral are practically non-existent here, but there are small crabs, shrimps, and other animals that live in the cavities under the reef crest, protected by the waves and predators. Then we have the fore-reef, which is the very front of the reef crest. It's a more rugged area and slopes down into the deeper depths. It acts to dissipate the tremendous force of incoming waves and stabilizes the reef structure. While the light intensity decreases here, reduced wave action allows for a greater number of corals to develop here. Then non-reef building corals become abundant and gradually replace stony corals in deeper, darker waters. So, where are coral reefs situated? Like, what's their range? Well, I have a picture here showing the range of them. So, basically, it is the shores, the shoreline. All of these little red dots are where reefs can be found. Most of them are around the shoreline of continents or islands. Some of them are in the middle of the ocean, which could be possible deep water reefs. But yeah, they're basically everywhere where it's warm, and some places there are even deep water cold reefs. So, I mentioned there in the coral reef range, deep water corals or deep water coral reefs. So, these extend to deeper and darker parts of the ocean than tropical corals and range from near the surface to the abyss beyond 2,000 meters, or 6,600 feet, where water temperatures may be as cold as 4 degrees Celsius or 39 degrees Fahrenheit. Like tropical corals, they provide habitat to other species. Deepwater corals do not require the algae to survive, and they grow more slowly than tropical corals because there are no algae to feed them. There are nearly as many species of deepwater corals as shallow water species. Only a few deepwater species develop traditional reefs. So whenever you look at the deepwater corals, there are not very many reefs down there. But some form aggregations called patches, banks, bioherms, massifs, thickets, or groves. So there might not be a traditional reef, but they do kind of form in groups sometimes. And then I do have some pictures of different deepwater corals, which this one reminds me of bubblegum. I don't know why, just pieces of bubblegum. And this one has all these different like sac filled things that look really cool, almost like a tree. So, very cool. So, what are some species that live inside these coral reefs? Because it's a lot of different species live there, but what are some of the most important ones? Well, one of them is the parrotfish. So, the parrotfish are herbivores feeding mainly on the algae, and a few mostly larger species such as the green humphead parrotfish feed extensively on living coral. They have a name for what they are, since there's herbivores, carnivores, there's coralivores, meaning they eat basically only coral. Then I have a picture of the green humphead parrotfish right above me there. After they digest the edible portions from the rock, like the algae that grow on the coral, they excrete it as sand, helping create small islands in the sandy beaches. A humphead parrotfish can produce 90 kilograms or 200 pounds of sand each year, and it's estimated that fewer than 1% of parrotfish bites involve live corals, and all except the green hump parrotfish prefer algae-covered surfaces over live corals. The teeth of these fish can grow continuously, replacing material worn away by feeding. Parrotfish also graze on sponges in the protection of the reef-building corals that would otherwise be overgrown by fast-growing sponge species. So, even though these parrotfish do eat coral, most of the time they're not eating live coral, and they're also eating the sponges that can otherwise overgrow these coral reefs, because sponges grow a lot faster than coral. And now you can sit here, whenever you go on a beach, you can sit here, it's like, wow, some of the sand that's produced here, especially like the white sand beaches, could be pieces of coral that were eaten by parrotfish that were then excreted. So, what does coral or coral reefs do for us, the world, everyone else? So, they have ecosystem services, which are basically stuff that just having the coral around help us. So, coral reefs deliver ecosystem services to tourism, fisheries, and coastline protection. So, the global economic value of coral reefs has been estimated to be between 29.8 billion and 375 plus billion per year, which probably is much, much, much more than that. Shoreline protections. Coral reefs protect the shoreline by absorbing wave energy, and mainly small islands would not exist without the reefs because they would be eroded. These coral reefs reduce wave energy by 97%, helping to prevent loss of life and property damage, and makes it so that these islands and coastline are more stable and affects erosion. Fisheries also are helped because of corals, because about 6 million tons of fish are taken each year from coral reefs, and well-managed reefs have an advantage annual yield of 15 tons of seafood per square kilometer. So, since fisheries usually fish around coral reefs, if these coral reefs were to die, then we would not have as much seafood as we usually would. And it surprised me that it takes 6 million tons of fish each year from coral reefs. That is a ton. So, what are the threats to coral? So, one is disease, which there are quite a few diseases, but most of them are like white band disease, stuff like that. There's also yellow band and black spot disease, stuff like that. That is basically named after what death the coral has. So, there might be a white band on the coral, which is the white band disease. There might be a black dot, which is the black dot disease, and then there's a yellow band, which is a yellow band. There's also predation, which could be stuff like parrotfish eating on them. Invasive species, which could come in and either eat or destroy the coral. Bioerosion by grazing fish, kind of like the parrotfish again. Algae blooms, which could cause a coral to die. Geologic hazards, climate change, which is causing the coral bleaching. Ocean acidification, which is also caused by that because of all the CO2 entering the ocean. Then recent human activities, which is one of the main reasons. So, what can be done to help protect coral reefs? So, coral reef restoration. So, there are coral farming and coral aquaculture things that have been done. Coral seeds are grown in nurseries and then replanted on the reef. So, if you look here above me, you can see something of a coral farm or a coral garden. This is staghorn coral, it looks like. And basically, they just hang the coral by a string or some type of rope or something inside the ocean, and they just grow like that. And then, whenever the coral grows to a certain size, they can go plant it onto a rocky surface to grow into a new coral reef. And then I also have a picture down here that are little pieces of concrete that they can grow on also. So, coral gardens take advantage of the coral's natural ability to fragment and continuously grow into if the fragments are able to anchor themselves onto a new substrate. The major benefit of using coral farms is it lowers the polyp and juvenile mortality rates by removing predators and recruitment obstacles. Coral are able to mature without much hindrance. So basically, they're babying the coral. So like if you coral out in the open ocean would have a very, very high mortality rate. Most of them would not grow into actual corals. But since they take these corals and they fragment them and they grow them individually, we can grow a ton more coral. So, something that they can do to help corals also is creating substrates or relocating corals. So, coral larvae cannot settle on sand. They have to grow on existing reefs or a compatible hard surface. So, substrate materials include stuff as discarded or sunk ships, subway cars, formed concrete, such as reef balls. Reef balls I've seen quite often. They're just basically pieces of concrete that are kind of grown in balls that are hollow that fish can also swim through and coral can grow on. Then there's also biorock, which is a substrate produced by a patented process that runs a low voltage electrical current through seawater, which causes dissolved minerals to precipitate onto steel structures. This is resulted in white carbonate or aragonite, which is the same material that makes up natural coral reefs. So this white carbonate will precipitate and like attach to all of these steel structures, which then make it easier for the coral to grow on. Coral reefs can then be planted or relocated to these new sites. Because there's some coral reefs that are kind of in bad areas and they keep getting knocked down, especially like seaports and stuff like that. So if they were to take pieces of these coral and move them to a place where they're not in the way or whatever, they can grow there without being destroyed. So another way that we can help corals, which is more of a laboratory experiment, are to change what the symbionts they have growing on them, the algae. And they can put heat-tolerant symbionts onto these corals. So this is a type of gene therapy where they inoculate coral with genetically modified bacteria or naturally occurring heat-tolerant varieties of coral symbionts. Then the coral that grow are more resistant to the climate change and other threats. So there are 4 different ways that they can do this. So they can either induce acclimatization with first generation of corals, where they expose the coral to stressors and hope that they gain a mutation. So basically they just take corals and they stress them out and see who survives. That's basically one of the routes. Another route is they identify what type of the algae are within the coral, and then they configure how much of each live within the coral at a given age, which can make it so that they can produce more energy and survive more heat-tolerant areas. They can selectively breed the algae and corals to make them more heat-tolerant. And then one of the last ways is they can genetically modify the algae itself to a more heat-tolerant form, and then put it onto or inoculate the corals. So this is a way that, like, since the oceans are warming up and we're not doing anything about it, the best way that we can protect corals is to make them more heat-tolerant, because there's nothing that's going to happen right now that is going to help them because of climate change and whatnot, and yeah. So that is all I had on corals. There was a lot going into this, and this is really one of the longer slideshows I've done, even though the timing is not. This is just a lot of work, and I feel like I talked quite a bit. So basically what I'm saying is we need to worry about climate change, because a lot of coral reefs, like how much of coral reefs was it in the Great Barrier Reef that had already been destroyed? Let me go look real quick. So yeah, the reef has lost more than half of its coral since 1985. So just within that amount of time, it has lost half its corals. The Great Barrier Reef, which is like the largest, like barrier reef, the largest coral reef, whatever. One of the 7 natural wonders of the world, and half of it was gone since 1985. So we really need to pick up the slack and try to help the oceans and stuff like that, because if you like seafood or if you like the oceans or whatever, losing the coral is a big hindrance to everything in the ocean, because that is where most of marine organisms live. And not only corals, but all the fish that live there and everything like that. And the economic value, like the economic ecosystem services that they produce, like we would not be as protected, especially from like hurricanes and big waves like tsunamis, stuff like that. Just waves in general eroding the shorelines and stuff like that. But yeah, I really like looking at coral reef restoration projects like coral farming and stuff like that. I would really love to have a big saltwater tank where I could grow corals and stuff like that. I do not live anywhere near the ocean, so I couldn't do this anywhere else other than an aquarium. But this is really cool how you can see there. And fragmentation in itself is very cool because you can do micro fragmentation where you can break it into very, 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 very small parts. And then you can place these parts onto the reef balls or these little pieces of concrete, or you can hang them like the stag coral there, and then they will grow from those individual, basically, polyps. So each polyp would grow its own piece of coral, like it would grow its own coral colony from each one of these polyps. So you can get so much more coral growing as long as we can keep them alive because of all the increasing temperatures, the ocean salinity, stuff like that. Ocean acidity. Very cool. Yeah. So that's all I have. This was very cool to do. I love corals. I love the ocean. It just was kind of sad to see how much coral has died and how all the pictures of coral bleaching, coral reef bleaching and stuff like that. But it is one of those things that we need to stay informed so that we know what's happening in the world and how we can protect the environment and everything like that. So I felt it was very important to do this one, even though it probably will not be seen. But hey, here's to hoping. I know this stuff is already kind of known, but the more it gets said, the more people see it, hopefully the better it is. So, thank you very much for watching. I hope you liked this educational video. I hope you come back for the next month's educational video. Still, don't know what it is. I'll have to find something to do. But, thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next month. So, bye-bye.